I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Mosaic of Wine Series 2. We continue the series today in the company of Rachel Clawson of Barrel Room Media. Rachel holds a viticulture and enology degree from Oregon State University, along with extensive experience in the wine industry. And Barrel Room Media blends this experience with expertise in photography, videography, and social media strategy. Her mission is helping brands tell their unique stories as a way to connect authentically with their audiences and build lasting relationships. In today's episode, we hear Rachel's origin story and transition from finance to wine. In culture and expertise, we cover the influences on Rachel's journey, which, as well as wine, include athletics and fitness. Rachel discusses the injuries that ended her fledgling athletics career in college, and the support she had to transition into wine, before taking a deep dive into Barrel Room Media, where we take a deep dive into the services they provide, where we discuss the different avatars for her clients and for herself. We talk generations in wine, and how those varied outside influences have inspired Rachel to vlog her own journey and indeed share her own authentic story. Enjoy!
I kind of stumbled into the world of like creative marketing world and photography and all that kind of stuff. Back, when I went to school at Oregon State and I got my bachelor's degree in viticulture and enology several years ago. So I started in the production side of the industry. I worked in California, Oregon, a little bit in Washington, and I went abroad to Italy for a while, which was obviously super fun and really enjoyed that side of it and didn't really know kind of, like I think as every like college grad, like no one really knows kind of where life's going to take you. In my case, I got married shortly after college and my husband was active duty Air Force. And so for the next several years, we moved around a lot. As if anyone's familiar with like mil-spouse life, that's pretty common. And so, of course, a lot of the places we went, like New Mexico and Arizona and Colorado, like not a big winemaking scene. And so I had minored in business. And so I kind of fell back on that and went back to school, got into the finance industry. And have actually been working in finance until January of this year. So I've been a financial advisor. I'm still a certified financial planner. But when we moved back to the Pacific Northwest in 2018, when my husband left active duty and went to the Air National Guard, that's when I was like, okay, I'm back in wine country. Like, how can I was enjoying a finance career. I have a very like kind of analytical, data-driven mind. I'm very type A, oldest child, like very typical of that like personality traits. But, there was a few tasting rooms and stuff very close to where we lived. And, we'd pop in there and, just get chatting and meet. And I, just would offer like, hey, if you ever need help, pouring an event or whatever, like I had my, license. So that's kind of how I got back into the industry. So that was after about a 3-year gap of being completely out of it. And that kind of evolved into then I, would take like, was kind of interested in photography and stuff. So I'd like take photos and just meet people. And the industry is very close knit, reconnected with people I went to school with. And then how I really got into what I do now. So now I'm running a creative agency, Barrel Room Media, but how I got into marketing was actually while I was working in finance. I worked for a very small firm based out of Washington, where everyone out of like the greater Seattle area, and everyone kind of takes on a second role, right? When you're in these like kind of smaller firms. And we were interested in starting to do our prospecting on like LinkedIn, YouTube, podcasts, like that kind of realm, as opposed to your traditional like billboards and cold emails and stuff. And so I was like, I volunteered. I was like, that sounds fun. Like I'll have that be my kind of secondary like hat that I wear. And I just got super into it. And YouTube University, I took a couple like paid courses and then started offering for like practice. And because I really enjoyed video production and just like learning how social media like actually works and seeing other people in other industries, like in the fitness space, have success online. Thought like, how could I make that work? And, maybe I could tie it to the wine industry. So I just started doing stuff for free and for fun, for practice. And, no one's going to turn down free help. So that was kind of through like COVID. And then COVID hit and, everything kind of shut down. And that's when I really started, I think like a lot of people started kind of seeing like, what do I want to do, for the rest of my life kind of situation. And I started taking a little bit more seriously. I started a little photography, a little solo sole proprietorship, kind of deal, and started taking on clients here and there. And so that was, 2021, 2022. And then October 22 is when I officially launched, I guess you could say, like Barrel Room Media, and started like taking that seriously as like a side hustle. I was still working full time as an advisor. And now fast forward to today, this year, January of this year is when I actually, that finance firm is my one like non-wine spirits industry client. So they are now a client of mine. Okay. So it's kind of funny how that worked out. I just got, lucky. They're just a great group of people. And so now I run Barrel Room Media full time and bringing on a second person here in about a month and probably a third shortly after. Just going for it.
Yep, I love it. That's great. I mean, and again, there's an absolute ton to unpack there.
Yeah, that was a long answer.
No, it's great. It's great. I mean, I think one thing that it's potentially sort of going across into culture. Yeah. Really now, but I know that something you've mentioned, and you've already mentioned it there in terms of some of the influencers, and I think it's something we'll revisit later. Is actually athletics and sport. Where does that really fit into the?
Yeah. Definitely. My whole life I was an athlete. I was even like briefly on the rowing team at Oregon State through high school, and just very minimally in college, a little bit of basketball and track and stuff. And And then when I was no longer, a competitive athlete, I just turned to like the gym. I worked at the gym, Dixon Recreation Center, Oregon State, go Bees, and was just started really getting into like bodybuilding and macros and fitness and all that. And obviously, so at that time, especially, I think was really like the rise of these like fitness influencers and sponsorships and people going to the Arnold and all that kind of stuff. And so some of the key people I found just again, like, through YouTube and interest in it were like Christian Guzman, the Alpha Elite owner, Max Tuning, who just sold sour strips to Hershey's, Kayla Lohas, just these really like so young and so talented and just like going for it in the fitness space or like clothing, like athleisure space. So they were really influential for me. I still follow them. They're just like some of my favorite channels to watch and get a lot of great just kind of like inspiration from them, not only from a business side, but also from how they create content. And I think the fitness industry is one of the most kind of similar to like fashion too. I think beauty are some of the most like forward thinking when it comes to content creation and digital marketing and like really using social media as a piece of their business. And so I study that and I enjoy that. And that's what I try to bring to our industry, to wine and spirits. And because I think we're kind of lacking still a little behind the curve in that space. So I try to bring that to the table.
Like that you brought in the influences from outside of wine, and just where that, and even, and again, I didn't know that actually, that you still have the finance client.
I'm still licensed. Yeah, I actually have to renew I have like 2 hours left of continuing ed. I got to do before the end of May. So I keep it strong.
Yeah, I know. I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's interesting, like, because I guess you haven't necessarily sort of told the whole story like that in one go. And, I'm a big fan of the quote, we kind of connect the dots looking back, and I've always just thought it was cool in your story that, you were from Oregon, somewhere that I've been to a couple of times, where there's such a strong wine culture. There's such a strong wine story, I would say, as well.
Yeah, agree.
And that's really where we met, wasn't it? It was where you first sort of came across me, I guess, was me being over in Oregon at the Oregon Wine Symposium, giving a talk to a room full of tasting room staff and around sort of storytelling and event engagement.
Yes. Oh, it was such a great, like, I'm so glad I went. It was very, very good. Just like your take on things, I think, is very aligned with some of the things I try to talk about. And yeah, it was a really good event.
No, thank you. And again, I think, hopefully, we get lots of people tuning in from the Pacific Northwest, because, I would love to sort of, for them to know that, we've sort of started a friendship and, we've sort of started exchanging ideas really off the back of that. But I think, that's really, where my mind is going right now is I'll be honest, I hadn't really appreciated, being here in London mainly and living a couple of places in Europe, but, having never lived in the States and, having certainly never, lived and spent a lot of time on the West Coast and really deeply in wine culture. Things like the Oregon Wine Symposium and those sort of big learning opportunities and these sort of,
Mm-hmm.
almost big conferences that happen in and around wine. Was that something that you were exposed to either in your sort of, first iteration, first go
Yeah.
around in the Pacific Northwest, and presumably it's now definitely on the radar now, in this sort of second go around?
Yeah. So yeah, I would say one thing. So when I was going through the viticulture enology program at Oregon State, it was really small. It was, I think, we had some amazing professors from like domestic as well as international. I had, someone from France, I had New Zealand, like Professor Osborne, I think is still there. I think he's like the head of the viticulture department now. We had Dr. Skinkis, who ran the enology side. And so there's a lot of real talent. And they, I think maybe through, I don't know how they did it, or maybe just because they were big advocates for us. Cause like, I think there's maybe 50 of us in the program, like in the entire program when I went through it, over 10 years ago. And they did a really good job of reaching out to the wine community, primarily, well, some from California, but primarily in Oregon and Washington, just, proximity.
Yeah.
And giving us opportunities to, whether it was go to an event or go like do, work at a vineyard, or we'd have like guest winemakers come in and make wine with us, or we'd get to go there. So whether it was through back then when I was going through school and kind of that first round of my first stint, in the industry, it was some event exposure but a lot of industry exposure. And then my first job, I got to keep a job in the wine industry just briefly when I graduated and got married. We moved to Colorado Springs, was his first duty station, and I worked as a wine sales rep and they're based out of Denver, and I kind of covered like the lower territory. So through that job I got to have for like 9 months, or no, I don't even know if it was that long. We didn't live in Colorado very long, unfortunately. We moved relatively quickly, but Natural Wine Company, they're awesome. Mr. Bowen is the owner, but they gave a lot of good opportunities too. And there's not exactly like wine events in Colorado, but he did what they could to, we got to meet with wineries or winemakers and stuff. And so from the event aspect, or like real industry, diving into the industry, I think that's come more now as I've kind of gone back into the industry in this more like professional capacity and networking and that kinds of things. So like Oregon Wine Symposium, gotten involved with the Alliance of Women in Washington Wine up here in Washington, in the Oregon Wine, or Women in Wine in Oregon. Those are such a mouthful.
Probably an abbreviation.
Yeah. But, and then of course, Vin Expo and Wine Paris, where we got to meet again. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space. And I think, especially like looking at Wine Paris this year, I know you and I have talked about this, of just what they're providing. And with the talk that you gave to the Oregon Wine Symposium, I think the industry is starting to lean more into this, kind of business development and marketing side, and trying to bring in some more knowledge. Because you just see like more talks, it seems like, on the docket for these events, which is kind of cool.
I love it, and I love that you've sort of brought in the different cultural elements, and exactly. Huge shout out to the Oregon Wine Board, for but really I think for taking a bit of a risk, really, bringing I know they didn't have a huge number of international speakers at the symposium, a lot of which is great, a lot of local domestic speakers, but I think there was only sort of 2 or 3 of us that had sort of made the long journey across, and it's great. We've sort of gone almost into the macro, something that again, because I just I literally spent 3 days in Oregon the last trip, and then my previous trip to Oregon back in 2020 was a week, and I was like super busy. I did like 20 interviews.
Right.
What I'm super curious though is to get it like really, let's go really into the micro then.
Yeah.
Being from Oregon as you are, and now living in Washington, do you sense a big difference in terms of the wine culture between those two places? Because I think outwardly, I would say from, where I'm looking outwardly in, they do tend to get kind of lumped together. And even in London, there was a joint tasting. And I know they're still doing a number of joint events. And people like Bree Stock are like, she's the master of wine for the Pacific Northwest. So I think, maybe from the outside, some of those lines do blur a little bit. But, thinking more on sort of culture and, kind of what you see, what you sense, how would you position those kind of compare and contrast in a way?
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool to hear. And I noticed that a little bit of that too, or kind of picked up on that at some of these bigger, especially like abroad, like Wine Paris, where, and you'll see, like the California, Oregon, Washington booths, like right next to each other, and people just kind of, but I would say from like, if you're an Oregonian, or if you're a Washingtonian, or probably even if you're a Californian, it is not that way. It is very much like, especially if you're, I think, culturally, right? Especially if you're
Mm.
from a kind of wine area or live in a wine area. So, for example, like you live in the Willamette Valley, or you live near, Red Mountain, or you live in
Mm-hmm.
Walla Walla,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or live in Woodinville. Like
Mm.
there's definitely, like, I'll hear this, from time to time when I still help out, pouring in a tasting room. You definitely hear like the home bias of people like, oh no, like I only drink Red Mountain wines. Like I just can't find anything even close. Or like
That's
Washington
consumers you're talking about.
consumers. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
Super
like,
loyal.
yeah, super super loyal, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just kind of
Yeah.
interesting. And then on the flip side, someone from Willamette Valley being like, oh, I only drink like Pinots and Pinot Gris, and just diehard Pinot fans. But then you come to Washington and they all hate Pinot, like, oh, don't give us Pinot, there's no body to it, there's no and so it's kind of funny. There is a lot of like Oregonians like their typical Oregonian wine, and
Mm-hmm.
there are like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hate broad generalizations, but you do just, offhand, like consumers in the tasting room, like you hear that a lot. And I remember hearing that when I was down in Oregon too,
Yeah.
working in
Yeah.
tasting rooms. And yeah, it's kind of like here we don't lump it together. We know like, okay, California Chard tastes, one way, or like compared to a Washington, or, it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
distinctive locally. Yeah.
What about on the producer side of things? I mean, I know
Yeah.
that the kind of headline stat, I think it's something like 90% of Oregon producers
Mhm.
make less than 5,000 cases, or less than
Yeah.
60,000 bottles. So a lot
Right.
of sort of boutique
Small.
sized, which
Hmm.
I guess kind of, well, again, my read of it, is that a lot of them, they're quite rightfully so. A lot of them are focused on
Yeah.
the domestic market,
Yeah.
selling in and around their city and in and around their
Hmm.
winery. Things like the
Yeah.
wine club take on that
Yeah.
massive significance then, because there's a sort of it seems an element of sort of recurring revenue as people sort of
Right.
commit and
Commit to be a member.
for the long
Yeah.
term. And I'm
Yeah.
just curious, do you see, because you say you probably worked in tasting rooms in both of them, did you pick up
Yeah.
any differences or similarities there in terms of the way that the wineries are run, really, and I guess maybe going across
Yeah.
into marketing and sales?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think in general, for the bulk of winery, like from a producer side, I think it's a similar concept. Like everyone's kind of a little more like, oh, like these grow best here, and Washington does this better than Oregon, or vice versa. I
Hmm.
think there
Hmm.
is some of that. But more, and there's some of that, but I think more often what I see is on the producer side, whether you're a winemaker, you're the club manager, you're kind of more in the industry.
Hmm.
I hear more often not like liking to get out and be more supportive of just the industry as a whole, regardless of where you make. You just like, good wine is good wine, and if someone's doing something they're passionate about, like, let's support them, which I really love to see. I've started to see a little bit more of that recently. I think there's still a lot of like, unfortunately, some competition over collaboration, but I think there's a lot of players, especially new players. Like you said, I don't even know how many hundreds of or thousands of like boutique wineries,
Hmm.
popping
Hmm.
up, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And I think a lot of people are trying to more just support the wine industry, and which is great to see. And that obviously translates to, marketing and sales, and just being more supportive and trying to educate too, of being like, you like, this style of cab that we make. Have you ever tried a Tempranillo, or, or something, or like, have you ever tried something a little different, or like, or people talking about their travels and be like, oh, if you
Yeah.
like our
Yeah.
Sauv Blanc, you should try Albarino when you're in Spain, or something, and trying to educate more.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because I've really gone down the sort of rabbit hole of what's the saying? It's like, the more you learn about something, the more you
Yeah.
realize that you don't know. And again, I really tried to sort of tailor my presentation to kind of
Right.
who was in the room, and I've
Okay.
carried
Yeah.
on and stayed looking very closely, and
Yeah.
just that whole piece around events, during,
Mm-hmm.
I think during the talk, we were focusing maybe slightly more on events at the winery, but I've
Yeah.
even really gone down the rabbit hole of these sort of seafood and crab
Uh,
and wine festivals that
yeah.
seem to happen, right, almost right the way around the year up there. It seems to be
Mm-hmm.
for the wine community in well, I'm sort of lumping them together now, but
But
both in
yeah.
Washington and in Oregon, it
Oh
seems
yeah.
that there's opportunities for people to come to the winery, and then
Yeah.
there's also lots of opportunities for the wineries to kind of go out
To
and
go.
meet and engage with the local
Yep.
community.
Yeah.
Do you again? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
Is there parts that I'm sort of missing there, or things that you'd add and expand on that?
Yeah.
Generalization.
I think you're right. Especially like since COVID, I think more like in the last couple of years, more and more, whether it's through like alliance or organization or just like a single winery, bringing about these events that aren't just on their estate, especially like with when you're a boutique, maybe you might not have an estate, like you just maybe have a tasting room or, and so you don't have somewhere to host. But yeah, you see, like the Seafood and Wine Festival or like Walla Walla Wine on Tour or, Pinot in the City. There's a lot of, obviously I'm most familiar with the Pacific Northwest ones, but yeah, I think that's another way that it seems like the industry from across, borders and whatnot are trying to come together and kind of just provide, events and an opportunity for consumers to experience, different wines and just bring it into the lifestyle or, yeah.
And there's something you mentioned earlier, which I didn't sort of pick up on at the time, but you were talking about competition over collaboration. I think with the words you used.
Yeah.
Were you talking about that in relation to Washington and Oregon itself, or within those states, or what sort of comes to mind?
With I think in general, I feel like there's a shift for the better, like a positive shift of more collaboration over competition, right? Like there's, we all do things, we all have our own story, we all do things our own way, we all like have a reason that we're in the industry, that we started a winery, and seeing more and more producers recognize that and just want to like genuinely support one another, I think will lift the industry as a whole versus having more of like this competitive or like, fierce, what they call like a fearful mindset or have an abundance mindset over it, like there's enough for everyone. We're all doing things our own way. It's just about finding our own people. I see, and especially when I talk to kind of along those same lines, when I talk to some of these newer winemakers, they're maybe just in their first few years of production, it'll be interesting as they grow over the next, decade or so, how like wine scoring works. Cause I talk to some of them, they're like, I'm not submitting my wine for scores. Like that's not important to me. What's important to me is, that my community or just, if it's good and other people like it, then that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of goes to of like, oh, I don't care if, I don't care if my wine got 99 points and theirs got 98 or whatever. So that's been an interesting, just like offhand kind of conversations I've had here and there of again, kind of in that same vein of like competition or support or collaboration.
Yeah. Which again, I love, and I can only kind of, pour petrol on that fuel, because it shone so much in Oregon, when I was there, and I had a week, and on some days I was doing 4 interviews back to back.
Oh yeah.
And I loved it. I loved every single minute of it, because it was just, okay, you're going to go here and, meet this amazing winemaker, and then go there and go there. And I think the word kind of got out a little bit, because then, I'd go to.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I did. There were a couple of sort of, extra under the table interviews, let's say.
Yeah.
But I'd go to, I'd have my little printout, and I'd go to, the first interview, and then I'd be like, oh, where are you going next? Oh, where are you? And people were so curious as to where I was going. And then the thing that just totally took me as, by surprise was they were so excited, really genuinely excited about where I was going. And then started mentioning it in the podcast. It was like started mentioning without any prompting whatsoever. I don't think so.
Yeah.
It was so organic to say, this person influenced me, that person influenced me. And then I didn't really necessarily appreciate it at the time, but then going and editing and listening to it back, you then just realize, hold on, actually, it is such a strong interwoven community here.
Right.
And that story it's like, I call it the secret sauce, but I think it's bigger than that. It's not a sauce. It's like, for me, that is everything. It's like, if you can communicate to everyone around the world and in your local community, maybe it's easier to see. But if you can somehow transmit that story around the world, I think it just transcends about points or scores or grape varieties even. It just becomes, wow, those guys in Oregon are just amazing, or wherever.
Agree. Yeah, no, I think it's and just like a little bit of conversational shift, like you mentioned. It's really cool to see, like, and I think we're kind of just generationally in that shift to where there are some of these senior winemakers that are have been mentoring younger guys or, the assistant winemakers now coming up, or there's just people coming in from other communities or different programs. And I always love it when I go, when I'm out tasting, and whoever it is that's, serving it recommends, when they can genuinely say, like you say, like, oh, where should we go next, or where's somewhere else? And they can say like, oh, go see John here, and you have to try his Zinfandel, or, like, I think it's just really cool when people are just supportive. Because you get that, I think you're naturally going to get that support back too. Like, they're already there supporting you, and you just want to, I think we want to see a lift in the industry. And it's cool that I think a lot of these producers are starting to lean into that, and it's just so positive, and it's just like good energy. And that's half the time when I get those, we're working on like content or something with a client, I'm like, tell me some of these, like, just, that's what it is. It's just like, talk about your community, talk about, there's a story there. And it's really powerful. Not to say that, wine scores and, those kinds, I don't think they'll ever go away. I don't think they're necessarily unimportant, but it's just, I think the days of where all the emphasis is on like, oh, this is a 100 port wine, so I'm going to buy it. I think that trend is shifting, and people are more buying brands that they want to support because that person's like, I think it's like when you pick whatever YouTuber you're going to watch, or, other products you're going to buy, you just want to support people that you're like, they're doing something cool, like, and they're good at it. Like, I want to support, I want to see them succeed. So
yeah, I love it. Okay, well, listen, we will, I think we'll get into maybe a little bit more of the kind of ideation, where we get into talking, a little bit in a slightly more structured way about, your service and kind of what you offer, because I think that will be a really interesting window into, kind of how it all comes together. But that being said, I would, not to sort of put a downer on things, but I do believe that reflecting on times of challenge, along the journey, which we haven't done to this point, and I did ask you to kind of think about that beforehand, and you mentioned really around your sports career ending, which again, I think in whatever way makes sense, kind of give us a little insight into, well, I guess how important sports had been at that time. You mentioned it in rowing and basketball, but what was that like, going through that experience, and what might be some of the learnings that sort of carried through.
Yeah, no, definitely. It definitely was a pivotal point in my life, and I would not be probably even remotely related to the career, to wine if it hadn't been for that. So when I was in high school was the first time I fractured my L4 and L5 vertebrae during track season.
Which is in your back.
In your back, yeah. So the lower, and recovered, healed, continued to have a pretty solid high school athletics career, and then wanted to play. All I wanted to do was go to Oregon State and play basketball. Like, that was my dream, and then I wanted to be an athletic trainer, like in the NBA. That was my career path. I wanted to be like athletic trainer, strength conditioning coach, work in basketball, and be a female in the NBA, like, because that was just not a thing. Like, I wanted to like break that barrier. So end up going to Oregon State, got on the rowing, practice, like rowing squad, just did, like, they had like tryouts, and you just kind of show up. And so I did that for a little while, and then opportunity came to try out for the basketball team, because they got a new coach who had been recruiting me to play at a private school, is where he was during my freshman year. Ultimately, that didn't really work out. I just kept getting hurt, and I essentially just refractured things, and it didn't go anywhere. So by the time I was, halfway through my sophomore year, it was like, had to face the fact that my, competitive athletics career was essentially over. And it was like devastating for me.
And sophomore is sort of 21 so I
would have been 19.
19,
yeah.
okay.
19, yeah. So much so that it was like, I don't even want to be like pursuing a career in athletics. I was just like, I don't know what I want to do. If I can't play, like, I don't want to be around it, kind of thing. And so I got a job, started working at the gym, which, because I kind of was going through physical therapy. And so that's how I kind of found my way into like bodybuilding and that route, just through years of physical therapy, and worked at the gym, made some friends. And I was meeting with my career counselor. So this would have been going into, it'd been like that summer, so I was 19, 20. I think it was going into what should have been my junior year, my third year with Stoner. And I was told her, I was always kind of interested in agriculture and being outside. I tried to get my first job at a winery when I was 16. My parents lived like 5 minutes away from one. And I was like, it'd be so cool. Like, it's just such a, like, at that time, before I knew anything about the industry, truly believed that like the wine industry was so romantic and glamorous, and it was like the movies, but I wanted to see what it was about. It was like, I'll work for free, like, put me, I don't care. No, like, you're not even 18. Like, we can't hire you. So obviously that didn't happen. So I remember telling her that story, and she was like, there's this new program, it's through the College of Ags, viticulturology, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you take this one class? It's called Intro to Wine, Beer, and Spirits. And it was one of those in the States. There's some credits that you have to take for your bachelor's degree that are in no way related to your major, but they're just like credits that like round out your education for the baccalaureate core credits. And she was like, even if you don't like it or don't, decide you want to go into, College of Ag, it'll satisfy those credits. So there's nothing to lose with you taking this class. So okay. And so I took it, and it was just so eye-opening. It was so cool. It was an amazing professor. You get to learn a little bit about, how to make sake, wine, beer, whiskey. And I just really became fascinated with it. And before, I think I was maybe halfway through the term, and I was like, I want to change my major. Like, what will it take? And so I was taking Italian minor, because I knew before I graduated, I wanted to study abroad in Italy. So I was taking Italian language, and she was like, perfect, we'll enroll you in viticulture and enology, which meant I had to extend. So I went 5 years before. It took me 5 years to get my bachelor's instead of the standard 4, but I was like, I don't care. And and just went like full into it. Looking back, I'm like, wow, fracturing my back was probably, and like not being able to be an athlete was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But at the time, I was just devastated, didn't know what I was going to do with my life.
Well, I love it though, and actually, I think it raises for me, a couple of points. One is that mindset, because it doesn't sound as though you gave yourself much of a chance to sort of feel sorry for yourself and and wallow, and you're like, I don't want to be around fitness, and then I started working at the gym. It's like it's
I can't completely leave it.
one deviation. But I think actually, genuinely, I think that is a really strong plus for the educational system there, because I think a lot of people have that. I think a lot of people like we typically have 3-year degrees here, and sometimes they're 4. But basically, if you get 2 years in and you change your mind, then it's like you're screwed.
It's like, good luck.
Like that, there really isn't any way to sort of make up the time. It's like it's a very inflexible system, and
interesting.
I had friends who didn't pass the first year, and it's like, okay, now you're basically back where you were. Well, you got to retake the things that you didn't pass, but you might as well just go and study something else, or it's very sort of inflexible. But
interesting.
Yeah.
Shout out to the career counselors out there. Like she was amazing.
she got you on the right path, and I guess as well from the outside, it's probably an interesting kind of to put the two next to one another, where it's like high end athletics, and I guess super healthy, and put that then next to alcohol and beverages. It was
not like
the two weren't related. Then it wasn't like I'm going to just go on a big bender to get over the disappointment. And I think that really interestingly, it's kind of brought me kind of full circle. I mean, I think do you remind me again where in Oregon was it then? Was it Portland that you grew up in, or was
I grew up in Central Oregon, so like Bend, Redmond, Mount Bachelor, that area, and then school Oregon State's in Corvallis, so just across the mountains.
Okay,
yeah,
but even a bit like there, like that was still wine influence. You sort of felt and the agriculture and wine influence around you. Kind of growing up, you would say.
Yeah, I should back up. So so we lived in Central Oregon till I was 14, like I was like a freshman or so in high school. And so there we lived more, I think we had like, I don't know, 9 acres or something. And so it was like cows and chickens and goats and that kind of thing, like my sister and I would like feed our, baby goats before going to school, some mornings and stuff. So Central Oregon is very much like farming, ranch, rodeo type. Yeah. And then when we were in high school, we moved to Roseburg, which is like not Rogue Valley, but Umpqua Valley. And that is Southern Oregon wine country. And they lived, so that was when I first started getting exposed to just like, because you see the vineyards driving around, or you see, or, we go wine tasting, like we have like soda or whatever, but, mom and dad or aunt and uncle would be going out, and they just always look so cool. And there are these beautiful estates, again, a little kind of more rural area. They're not like urban tasting rooms. I think there's a couple there now, but for the most part, when you go, there's like tasting room, there's the vineyard, and it's very, there's the river and the hills, and it's just beautiful. I'm just different movies too coming out at the time, of like, I don't know, just like living in Tuscany and starting, all that. I was definitely like that age or like that era. Yeah. So it was about high school when I started. It was like, oh, that's kind of a cool, like, I don't know. And then, yeah, going to school. Oregon State obviously is a very big agriculture college. I think it was called like, I don't know, something along those lines, like way back in the day. But that was where.
Yeah, it does. I mean, again, it does strike me as a really sort of a formative kind of upbringing when you grow up on a plot of land, and you're away from the city. I've had experiences like, probably the longest time was over in Australia, where I was,
oh, cool.
I was staying on a permaculture farm, volunteering, and it was pretty much all self-sufficient, and there was no signal there. It was pretty isolated. But I did, like, honestly, I got that reflected back. It was like, if something would break, and I would be like, oh, we're going to get a new one, and the people there who had either grown up on farms or were coming into farming and being working in an agricultural setting, they were very much, they were more resourceful than me. They were just
like we just got to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think that's a useful segue, really, maybe across into the section I call service, where we look at like what you kind of actually do on a day-to-day basis. And I know that you've mentioned here, in the sort of questionnaire, you mentioned about, people commenting on your own resourcefulness, really. And, and like, if there's a way to figure it out, Rachel will kind of figure it out. So,
yeah.
Give us a bit of an insight then into what are the sorts of people that you're working with, I would say, through Barrel Room Media, and what are the sorts of things that you're figuring out for them?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, we're I just call it a creative agency, right? Because we've kind of grown into providing, social media management, email marketing, paid ads, photo, video, kind of everything under that digital marketing umbrella, primarily for, craft brands, wineries, spirits, breweries, etc. Just because we have a few others. At the end of the day, I just like to work with good people who are passionate about what they do. My personal passion and kind of some industry expertise lies in that craft band space, just given my background. So it's just been kind of a natural fit, hence, Barrel Room Media. There's still the romantic in me when it comes to like, touring a winery or distillery. I always am like, if there's an opportunity to see the Barrel Room, that's where I want to go. Like, I'm just stay in one, I always love, and so, so we kind of provide everything under the sun, under that realm. And we're, a growing team. It's been just me for the last couple of years getting things going. And I honestly, when I got into it, never expected, I was that person who, despite having like a business entrepreneurship minor and just kind of being one of those people that kind of can figure stuff out, or kind of, I try to take on the mentality of like, well, if they can figure it out, like I probably could, someone's got to do it. I'll do it. And so despite that, like every time, I remember, especially like in the finance space, you get asked that a lot. If you become a financial advisor, like, oh, when are you going to open up your own firm? It's just a natural route to do that. And I was always like, no, I can't do that. Like, it's too scary. It's too risky. I'm too, I need, more just show up and leave, kind of deal. And obviously that's not the case anymore. But I hear, and I think how I've been able to evolve and now start growing a team is because, start working with, like I have a longtime restaurant client. They're like my first client a couple of years ago. And we started just with basic, Instagram and Facebook management. And I would, go on site once a month to do content shoots, like the menu, the cocktails, etc. And we still do that. It's still a big piece of our relationship. But then over time, other things have come up, like, what do you think about this? Or like, we're going to try to implement SMS marketing, or like, can we do paid ads and all this stuff that I had no idea how to do. Like, but I was like, well, it seems like something I should know, or like it fits. It's like in the same kind of realm or scope. And so I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then I do, whether I, take a course, or I learn from someone else, or I watch a YouTube video, or I just dive deep into like the Meta Business Suite help center. I've just started like growing skills that way, and try and tell my clients that, like, I'm growing and I appreciate they're growing with me. And now as we bring on new clients, we have, that skill set to offer, like, oh no, like we have a process to do your email marketing, or to do your meta ads, or to, So yeah.
No, super interesting. Well, I'll mention it because it's something I got reminded of over the weekend when I was listening to a podcast about a guy who's who's well, I've got his book here actually, so I can remind it, because I always shout him out. I'm always scared that I'll say his name wrong. There's a guy called Rob Fitzpatrick.
Okay.
And
right. Oh, cool.
Fantastic author. This is Write Useful Books, and he was on this really, again, he's just, love him. He's, great podcast guest, and he was on this business podcast, and he was talking around when he was writing another book, which was actually the one that I used preparing for my talk in Oregon. That was how I first came across him, which is this one, the Yellow Book.
Nice.
And basically, he was saying that it really got specific about who he was writing the book for. So for example, he ended up writing it for people who were entrepreneurs and who were working in tech, who needed to give a workshop or a presentation. So he ended up he was writing it for himself. He's like, I'm an introverted designer. I don't like talking to people, but the product starts blowing up. I need to go out and give these presentations. Yeah. And he realized that some of the wording he was using in, earlier drafts of the book were basically, they were for the tech entrepreneur, but then they kind of also then started going into teachers and saying, if you're a teacher, you can do this, or you can. And then he went through beta reading, and he had some teachers in his beta reading, and they all they were up in arms. They're like, what are you talking about teachers for? You don't know anything about teachers. You're not a teacher. And he's like, okay, I get the feedback. He ended up taking out the sections of the book where there was any mention of teachers. So he got back in his lane and wrote it for his tech avatar, let's say. But the really funny thing was, though, when he then brought the book out and it was just for his tech avatar, then teachers started picking up on the book.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
and they were like, "Wow, this would work for us." This would work for us. And a bit a long segue, but the point really was, I'm curious about how specific do you think wineries need to be about who they're selling to? And who they're positioning themselves for. And I think, related to your service, do you kind of have to have that type of conversation quite early on? Because, presumably, as you skill up and as the world skills up, there are maybe other, unspoken skills, around understanding, around positioning that, are actually, arguably as important or more important than the technical side of things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's usually even just on a discovery call, it was one of the first conversations we'll deep dive into is tell me who you are. What do you do? Why do you do it? Who is coming into your tasting room? Who's buying it? Where are you at now? And then does that align with who you want to be? Does that align with your story? Does that align with your brand? Right? All encompassing into your brand. Because if you can't answer those questions, then nothing you do in, online or email or from a marketing perspective, it's all just going to fall flat. And you're right, to your point, being now fully, I think every generation is pretty well immersed in the digital age. My 92-year-old grandma has Facebook and can sleuth out, a scam. So I think if you're, oh gosh,
go grandma.
Go grandma. She's not falling for that. I think we're just in that age, and with the emergence of AI, it's just so important to be authentic and not try to do what everyone else is doing. I think how that feeds into your audience more oftentimes than not, especially in wine, I find, because you can dive deep into the different generation, Gen X, typically thinks this way or buys this way, or Gen Z, the X way. They're all kind of your customer from that granular of a perspective. And I think when talking with a club manager or a producer or something, they get kind of hung up on, well, if I'm selling to, I can't ignore my, boomers that signed up, that started the club, my founding club members, but I want to bring in, Gen Z or millennials. And it's okay, forget about that piece. Who are you? And then the right people, regardless of their age or their generational whatever, will find you, and then almost even more importantly, they'll stay with you. They'll be that's just who they are, so they resonate with you, and that's what's important. Having that, and I find, and I've had conversations where if someone can't answer that, or they're not willing to kind of go down that rabbit hole, I'm just I don't think we're at a point to work together, because it's just, we're just setting ourselves up for failure if we can't be honest with ourselves about that piece of it, and get out of the well, so-and-so's doing this for, this generation or whatever. It's that doesn't matter. Think about you. What's unique about you? Why are you doing this?
I'm cheering from the side, cheering from the sidelines here, because I approve this message 110%. How did you get to that position, Rachel, to do that for other people? Did it come as a process of doing that for yourself, or through some other path?
I think probably through a combination of avenues. I think just the more and more I've had those conversations, just each time I have one, like I learn something, or I get feedback, or as I run campaigns, or just kind of, I just think the deeper I've gone into the industry and deeper I've gotten into this kind of skill set, those kinds of things have just started jumping out. And for me personally, I think that's just how I don't know, when I start thinking things about it, I'm like, well, to me that just makes sense. I'm like, just that I don't like to put things in boxes, especially if the boxes don't make sense. And like I said, our tagline is authentic storytelling for passionate craft brands. So like, we should focus on what you're passionate about and just be authentic to you, and the rest will kind of come. And I think I've adopted that mentality too through kind of being immersed in some of these other industries, like just the general, like kind of entrepreneur industry or the fitness space. Like that is kind of repetitive messessaging that you hear from, even like Gary Vee or something, and that's just kind of how I try to, So I think that's just kind of how I've just leaned into that because it just feels natural to me. And I see, from a statistical standpoint or whatever, like it's something like you see success that way. So like that success I think comes if you're just, it's like when like finance, gurus or whatever saying like, if you're not really focused on the money or business guru, you're not focused on the money, like that's the outcome, that's the byproduct of you doing the work. So I think it's kind of same type of concept.
And then what does that look like for Barrel Room Media then? I mean, how granular do you, I mean, I know you said there in terms of, okay, on the discovery call, I guess you're looking for some green flags and red flags.
Yeah.
How much and how far have you gone in defining your avatar? And talk to me a bit about what that looks like. Of course, with the caveat that it evolves and it changes. And what does it look like today? Let's say.
Yeah, for our client avatar, like us
exactly.
bring on a client.
What we're talking about on the winery side. What does that actually look like for you?
Yeah. I think for us, it looks like, I mean, I don't have numbers around like, oh, you're, X amount in revenue or case production or that kind of thing. But the big things I look for are someone who has a winery or has a distillery or whatever it is, because that's what they want to do. Like they're actually involved, like the winemaker, the distiller, the brewmaster, like they are involved versus it's like a corporation, that's kind of holding over. I don't think there's anything bad with that, but I think you start running into like a lot of middlemen and it's really hard to really hone in. So if you're in it, but you're not really like involved, that's something that's important. I think kind of in that same vein of some, I don't know how to describe this, but like when we're talking with someone who I'm creating messaging for is for brands who want to be unique and they want to grow. Like they want to evolve with their production, their style, whatever it may be, and impactful in the industry as well. They're not necessarily just like off doing their own thing and like, oh, I don't care about anyone else. Like I think they believe in building a community, and then kind of in that same vein sees social media, we'll say, digital marketing as a piece of their business, not just as something that's like, oh, like if I'm talking to someone and the comparison is like, well, we could have so-and-so part-time tasting room helper just throw up photos on Instagram. We could do that, or we could work with you. I'm like, you're not at a stage for us to be working together. You gotta like marketing and social media and content should be seen as a piece of your business, because that's what we do. Then when we go deep dive, it's like, okay, well, how are we seeing like results from your work? Like, what are you doing on the business side, on the production side? That is what dictates what we do on the social media side, on the marketing side. So those are, I know, like kind of broad categorizations of like my avatar, but it's kind of some of those big pieces.
No, it's super interesting, because I think, what I'm picking up very much is the word that jumps out to me is actually respect. I think on all levels, it's like respect for yourself. Because you want to, as you say, you're in the business. It's not I guess a side hustle, or it's not it's not something that you haven't got skin in the game.
Like,
So it's like, okay, I've they are taking it seriously, but then also, as you say, they have to respect your craft, right? It's like, and there's nothing, there's nothing ostensibly wrong with using, your niece or your nephew to do the Facebook.
Yeah, like we all go through that phase, and that's just like a natural part of the progression. And I used to fill that gap, like that used to be me starting out. I was the, the friend or the part-time staff or the whatever. And I think a lot of businesses, regardless of industry, go through that phase, but we're just not there. And so now there's, just like anything else, any cycle, now there's other people that are in, do what I do or similar, but they're in that phase of their journey. So like they could fill that gap. We're not at that place anymore.
Yeah.
And, because we want to be set up for success with the brand, right? Like we want to be able to actually have them grow and see success and be, and also find like joy. It's some people just, don't necessarily want to like be on camera or whatever, but I think that shifts a little bit as you kind of have some guidance and you start seeing like things working, like anything else, like working out, or maybe you don't want to, no one wants to start going to the gym, but 6 months from now, you like it because you're like, oh, I've seen some results. Like I'm invested. Yeah. And so working with those types of people, they're just like passionate about what they do. And yeah, respectful on kind of all front to the industry, to themselves, to us, like I think is super important because we want to be impactful in that way.
I love it. And I know, as we the hour is sort of, first hour is sort of really flown by as I knew it would. And again, I'm not putting us under any pressure to, put the world to rights. And, there's lots of topics that we could have covered. But one topic that I absolutely do want to talk about, and I think it'll be fun maybe to hear, for you to hear this from me. But I've got to say, you are doing, I believe that you personally, are doing some really like just fun and interesting things with your own presence online, let's say, the things you're putting out on YouTube, things you're putting out on social media, and just really fun. And I think, I'll just use the V word, which is blogging.
Yeah.
And for many years, again, I consume lots of different styles and probably really went down the Gary V rabbit hole a few years ago when he was when he did the daily
the
V,
daily
the daily back in 2017 or whatever it was. Every day he put out a vlog, and I don't think you're aiming, or you want to be Gary
I'm not
V
quite at that
Mark
level,
II. get yourself a D-Rock. But talk to me about vlogging, because again, I don't see many people in wine full stop vlogging. Maybe we'll come into it as sort of a second part, but I personally see that there seems to be at this moment, or for the past few months or years or however long, there's a lot of, I see a lot of maybe very similar style content coming out on Instagram. Again, it feels like you're not doing that to copy anyone else in wine, because no one else is really doing it.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. And I think this kind of ties to these like outside influences, how I kind of got started in the content space, through finance and through fitness primarily, and just seeing what they do. And that's vlogging their lives, vlogging, starting a business, just sharing just that real, if I say like our tagline is authentic storytelling, like, well, I better be living up to that myself, of like, this is the good, bad, and ugly of what I'm doing. So I like to vlog on that, like just take it along for the ride of here's what's happening. And in my case, when I can, or in whatever creative way I can incorporate, go into a winery or just trying a new cocktail or whatever it may be, I like to do that. And even more so if I'm out and about and have the opportunity to bring in like a producer or someone into the vlog, I just think that's like really cool and a really real way of sharing them. And it's a fun experience for me, just getting a little inside scoop on wherever it is that I am. But yeah, so I like that vlogging aspect. It does take a lot of work. Like it's a lot harder than just throwing up a 10-second reel with some like hook on it, or just showing like a pretty like swirling a glass, or like top 10 places to visit in Tuscany. Like all that content's well and good. I've never bashed on that. Like I consume a lot of that content. It's all great, and it has its place in the industry. Just that particular style is not me. And I tried it like over the years. Every once in a while I've tried that, and I'm like, it just feels so forced. Like I'm just gonna do what I know how to do, or what I've seen done, and just try things to be a little bit different. I think I even had, that was even like a subject of, I send out a weekly email to my subscriber list every Friday, and I think that was the subject, like I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, of like, I'm not the like pretty influencer that's gonna like take you to Bordeaux, but I will show you the struggle I had this week on my Notion template, and I had a glass of wine after to help to help get me through it.
Yeah,
So,
it's again, it feels as though actually, yeah, there's a connection back to what what I was talking about earlier in terms of I think I genuinely think it's everything when a winery talks about another winery, and I think
yeah,
almost in the same way,
yeah,
perhaps it's more kind of it's more just about you versus you in a way,
yeah. It
but
really is. You're
yeah,
your competition. Yeah.
your way to kind of express that and leave it in, and then I'll be honest, then even the other day I was having a call with McKenna, who I think you met
Oh yeah,
in
McKenna's the best.
and then
Yeah.
I mentioned that we were going to be having this interview,
Uh huh.
and you were coming on the podcast, and then I laughing now thinking about it, and then I said to her, I was like, yeah, I love like Rachel vlogs, and
Uh-huh.
the thing that I remember from the last vlog of yours that I watched was when
Yeah.
you had the camera there, and then you like spilled your sandwich and it dropped on
Oh
the.
yes. Yeah, that's my life. That was the yeah. After a long travel day content, and I'm trying to like take you along in the vlog, and it just all over my car. Yeah, no, that's the kind of content you're gonna see from me.
And it's just I was like, that's great. It's like I don't see anyone else in and around wine do
Yeah.
it. And it's not to say you gotta sort of go out and manufacture content, but it's just
Yeah.
there was just a level of authenticity, I guess, is what I'm really saying.
Hmm.
That I think,
Yeah.
yeah, you're modeling it. So
Thank you. That's what I'm going for.
kudos.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Kudos to you. And I've got to say, it would be, it always gets a little bit meta at this point. But
Yeah.
where I've noticed that in your kind of content strategy and what you're talking
Yeah.
about for your clients, you haven't mentioned audio, you haven't mentioned podcasts. And I'm just curious, because again, I'm sure you're listening to, a lot of people in the fitness space have got podcasts, I'm sure. And,
Oh, yeah.
a lot of,
Yep.
huge accounts have podcasts now. And, it's
Yeah.
a huge thing. So yeah, where do you sort of sit with podcasts and audio, even as a
Yeah.
as an embodying category, let's say?
Right. No, I consume a lot of podcasts, obviously, like this being one of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, and you're right, in the fitness space and like the entrepreneurial space. And I think it's a great medium for any industry. And you're right, there's there's a couple like wine related podcasts, right? But I think a lot of them are the same, of just kind of like a gal or a guy or a couple people, just like tasting a wine and like reviewing it themselves, which isn't bad, but I think there's a lot of that. For like an actual, winery to be doing that, I think there's opportunity there where you could talk about like running a winery, like what's it like to like have a winery, and talk about your wines, your production, your story. And like a lot of, especially like winemakers, a lot of them, in the off season, they're out in market and they're going to different events and tastings, and they're doing all these showings and things. Like there's so much opportunity. I think the roadblock I run into with 99% of them is just like the time and effort it takes to go into that, and having someone that wants to be, like dedicate time to running that. Because as like podcasts take a bit of work, and you want to do them right for them to be successful. And you have to just kind of want to do content in that way. But that being said, I have one new client that is in the works for us.
Yeah.
As a project, and I think it is going to be phenomenal, because they're passionate about, like, it's a medium that fits them because it's something they want to do, and they have a lot to say, and they have lots of ideas, and they have the capacity to do it. I think if you're not in that space, or not prepared to do that, then it's a harder one to implement compared to like Instagram or Pinterest or something.
And just so that I'm clear, then does that mean that you like, even still, when you're doing the videos, like I've seen you going to the other day there was one where there were all these like plates of food coming out, and you were getting the
the restaurant,
the food shots, right? But does it, like, where does the balance sit for you in terms of capturing what are really powerful images of the winery, of kind of, these kind of almost B-rolly type,
Right.
this is happening and this is going on and this is the chef in the kitchen and,
Yeah,
all these great images versus actually telling the story of the founder of the winemaker.
Yeah.
Where does that sort of sit with you in terms of your mix and what your clients are comfortable doing? How does that look?
Yeah, I think right now, just about everyone that I've either currently worked with or have talked to leans more to they just kind of want to be a little bit more hands off and not, there wouldn't be opportunity for a podcast type media there, regardless if it was like video only or audio only or also with video. Yeah. So then we're more heavy on the visual, right? The wine itself or the pairing or the scenery or, whatever. But the ones that are open to it and would like to implement that, I think it is just like we've been talking about, like it's kind of an untapped space, especially for this industry. Yep. And it can be a really powerful tool, especially going along with all the other things we've talked about just like building community and like brand recognition and brand loyalty and just like sharing your story and like almost keeping yourself in that mindset. And it's like a constant, I think when you go that podcast type style content, it's almost a constant reminder of like why you're doing what you do because you're kind of talking about it all the time, like outwardly and with other people. So I think there's a big opportunity there. So I'm really excited for this one brand that is on our kind of media to-do list, but I hope there'll be more that will be open to it. And there's more than one, like there's more than one right way to do a podcast or to do like that kind of longer form content.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a shift, like short form content's never going to go away, but I recommend this to everyone I talk to, like you have to have one piece of longer form content, like to truly be successful in this space, whether that's a blog, a podcast, a vlog, something that's more deep. That's those people that consume that kind of content from you is your club, your tribe, like.
Totally. Well, I'm super excited because I've been working with a winery in Oregon and bringing some of those. Well, we'll go a little bit sort of techie and a little bit sort of down the rabbit hole now. But so Cellar Soundbites is part of what I was talking about in Oregon, but it's effectively, it came from me asking myself the question: how do I break the fourth wall? For podcasts? So it's like, okay, podcasts are great. All of the things you just said there, I completely agree with. But how do we bring them more into a real life settings? So it's this sort of thing. It's like saying we can have. We've got a winery. We've got these 6 wines that are available in England. We can have them all here. Each one with a description from the winemaker. We can have a description from the importer. Talking about Nova Scotia. And then we can have the owner or one of the family of the owners of the winery coming on and giving the 6-minute. We're here in Nova Scotia. This is how we set up. This is we're in the Bay of Fundy and we have these crazy waves and all these things that I've only remembered because I've listened to this. And it really, I think that's so cool. It goes deep. And, we're experimenting with some interesting ideas. And again, I'm learning around the importance of Wine Club, which we haven't even really spoken about. But I just think it seems to be Wine Club in a to step back in an entrepreneurial type glasses. That's really the value of something like a subscription, isn't it? It's like almost how these SaaS companies get these massive valuations because it's recurring. It's this recurring revenue, and I guess it's kind of it relates back to gym memberships. You don't want so much churn. You want people. What's the lifetime value? How many months are they staying for?
Right. Yeah.
And we're experimenting with using Cellar Soundbites to basically bring the principal, bring the founder, the winemaker. The one who's probably not going to be in the tasting room and is not going to be who you'll meet. Bring him closer to his audience and to his wine club members.
Oh, I think that's powerful, and that's like there's nothing else really available that I know of that's like that, and I think that goes a long way, especially when you kind of look at other industries, that kind of are able to tap into the owner, or the founder, or the face. You got to have some type of connection like that. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and it's great because I think again you're drawing your influences from fitness and from other industries and hopefully we're probably known as wine related people, so we'll hopefully get I always say if one winery owner or one winemaker hears this and kind of gets inspired, I'd love for that to set off a chain of dominoes, or a kind of a reaction with someone somewhere in the world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Just one person at a time, kind of help, doing something cool. Yeah.
And I think, that's a perfect segue in closing, really. So enjoyed our conversation. The time has completely flown by. There was loads more I wanted to talk about. But that being said, I'd love to leave our listeners with, your coordinates, where they can find you, how they can follow your vlog, maybe your future podcast. Let's see.
I know. Yeah, I like the video podcast idea. So I'm based in Eastern Washington, but as you've probably gathered from this episode, I travel a lot for fun and for work, and it's usually a combination on every trip. And you can find our website is just barrelroommedia.com. You can follow me for the personal content that we talked about and the vlogging and stuff on YouTube is Rachel C. Clawson, on Instagram and TikTok, Rachel C. Clawson. And Barrel Room Media also has an Instagram and a Facebook for more of that kind of technical. We post more kind of educational and like social media kind of, or digital marketing, like tips and things type content on that side. But all the other kind of stuff goes on my pages.
A massive thanks to today's guest, Rachel Clawson of Barrel Room Media. Visit barrelroommedia.com, the link is below, to learn more about their services and, of course, find Rachel's main social media handles. Rachel and I are both very big on social connections, so please reach out to her and let her know what you thought of the episode and ask any questions it might have raised. Next time on Interpreting Wine, Mosaic of Wine, Series 2, in episode 588, I'll be speaking with Matt Della, MW, CEO of Wira Wira, as we talk modern, quality Australian wine brands. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's another good one, so make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when that episode goes live. And talking of staying social, if you're not already, follow along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, or email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you soon.